As they lowered my wife's casket into the cold ground, I stood alone. My parents, my brother, even my closest cousin, all absent. They had chosen my brother Kevin's extravagant engagement party in Napa over my reality. The moment the first handful of dirt struck the wood, my phone vibrated in my pocket. A text from my mother, not a word of condolence, just a reminder about the family trust. I looked from the flag covering my wife's casket to the cold glow of the screen. In that instant, I realized the people who are supposed to love you most can betray you with breathtaking cruelty. So how do you rebuild a family from the ashes? I am Captain Alex Miller, United States Army. In the military, they teach us control. Control of your weapon, your formation, and most importantly, your emotions. Discipline is the foundation. I thought I understood discipline, understood loss, understood how to stand tall while everything around you crumbles. But no training exercise prepares you to stand before a grave bearing your wife's name. November in Arlington is cold and damp. The sky was gray, spitting a light drizzle. I stood at attention, hands clasped behind my back in parade rest. My eyes fixed on my wife Chloe's flag-draped casket. My dress blues were immaculate, a polished shell hiding the invisible weight crushing my shoulders. Around me were only the Army chaplain and a few close brothers in arms. 3 empty chairs in the front row, where my family should have been, gaped like open wounds. There was no rifle salute, no playing of taps, just a solemn silence, broken by the steady patter of rain. 2 soldiers from the honor guard stepped forward. Their movements were crisp, precise, without a single wasted motion. Each fold of the flag was deliberate, respectful, turning the fabric into a sacred triangle. One of the soldiers approached me. He met my gaze, a soldier's eyes to a soldier's. "Captain Miller," he said, his voice low and clear, "on behalf of the United States Army, please accept this flag as a symbol of appreciation for your wife's service to our nation as a military spouse." I extended my hands and took the flag. It was heavier than I'd imagined. This was the Army's acknowledgement of her quiet sacrifices, the same sacrifices my own family had ignored. The chaplain placed a hand on my shoulder, offered a few words of comfort, and then they all departed. Soon, it was just me, the rain, and the pain. I stood there motionless, feeling the cold seep into my bones. Then, my phone vibrated. I pulled it out. The screen lit up with a new email notification. The sender was my mother. The subject line was 3 words, all caps. Urgent. Family trust matter. I looked at the email subject, then back at the flag in my hands, in the silence meant for Chloe. Their urgency was a cruel joke. The contrast between the quiet respect I had just received and the callous demand on the screen was more brutal than any words could be. In that moment, the grief didn't vanish. It crystallized, becoming something colder, sharper. In that moment, I understood I had truly lost one family, and at the same time, chosen another. Sitting in the empty living room, still in my dress uniform from the funeral, I read my mother's email for the 3rd time. The words on the screen were as cold as steel. Not a single inquiry about how I was, not a drop of sympathy, just duty and money. I wasn't surprised. The only thing that still stung was that Chloe wasn't here to see it. If she were alive, she would have walked over, put a hand on my shoulder, and whispered, "Let it go, Alex. You have me." But not this time. This time, I had to face the void alone. Thinking of that emptiness, my mind drifted back to the beginning. When Chloe and I met, when our love sparked, and when the cracks between my family and me began to show. Chloe was unlike anyone I'd ever known. She had a way of looking me straight in the eye, as if she could see past the rank and the discipline to the man beneath. To her, I wasn't Captain Miller. I was just Alex, the guy who drank his coffee black and couldn't dance. I loved that simplicity, and I believed that as long as we had each other, we could overcome anything. But our love was never fully welcomed. I remember the first time I went to Chloe's parents' house. Her father, a lawyer, studied me in my uniform as if I were a complex legal problem. He gave me a firm handshake and asked questions about the future and stability for his daughter with a soldier. Chloe's parents were worried their daughter would have a hard life. They feared the constant moving, the long deployments, the hurried calls from war zones, and the prospect of a life in temporary quarters instead of a luxury home. In their eyes, the ideal husband was a businessman who could provide stability, money, and prestige. That night, Chloe took my hand under the table. A gentle but firm pressure. Time. And Chloe changed them. Her parents saw something more important than stability. Devotion. Slowly, they became my family. My own family was a different story. Especially my mother. She never truly accepted Chloe. To her, only Kevin, my younger brother, was the family's pride. Kevin was smooth, worked for a big company, knew how to give expensive gifts and say the right things. And me? To her, my military career was just a duty, a phase, not an achievement. They weren't overtly critical. Instead, they chose sweet words that were laced with poison. "We're so proud of you, Alex. But have you thought about a stable career after this?" Kevin's salary just went up again. He can buy us a trip to Europe. The questions, the comparisons, repeated over and over, were like drops of water wearing away at a stone. Through it all, Chloe was my shield. She met my mother's coldness with quiet warmth. She spoke of the value of my commitment, not in a preachy way, but with sincere belief. She reminded me that what I did mattered, even when my own family denied it. Chloe's death didn't just take the person I loved. It took away my only ally within my own family. And that, to me, was colder than the funeral in Arlington. Their indifference didn't stop. It escalated. It had begun months earlier, when Chloe got her diagnosis. When Chloe started coughing up blood, I thought it was just a bad cold. She had always been healthy, full of life, so my mind never entertained worse scenarios. But the doctors quickly shattered that illusion. Stage 4 cancer. No military campaign had prepared me for those words. Within weeks, our world shrank to the size of a hospital room. I was granted extended leave. Nothing else mattered. My only mission was to be by her side. The first call I made was to my mother. My voice shook as I tried to piece together the medical terms. I thought my family would at least share some of the burden. But after I told her, my mother just paused for a beat, then replied, "Oh God, that's terrible," she said, her tone holding no panic, only inconvenience. "But Chloe's a fighter. She'll pull through. You have to stay positive." Positive. That word became their mantra in the calls that followed. It was the perfect excuse for them not to face reality. An expensive flower arrangement arrived at the hospital the next day, with a card full of printed platitudes. That was the only time they showed up. She immediately changed the subject. "I'm so stressed, Alex. You know, Kevin's engagement party. Everything has to be perfect. The engagement party." In that moment, I was silent. My world had just collapsed, and hers was consumed with tablecloths and guest lists. That was it. She never once asked where the hospital was, or if Chloe needed anything. Kevin was busy showing off the engagement ring, preparing their golden couple image for the wedding. As I expected, they never visited the hospital. My cousin Matt, who I'd grown up with, did call. At first, his voice sounded sincere. "I'm so sorry, Alex. Anything you need, just call me." But those promises faded quickly. The calls became less frequent, replaced by short texts. The excuse was always that he was busy. He was helping Kevin with his best man duties. Apparently, that role was more important than our brotherhood. The real support came from where I least expected it. My military family acted. My CO's wife, Sarah, who Chloe adored, organized a meal train. Every night, a fellow soldier or their spouse would bring food to our house. leaving it quietly on the porch so as not to disturb us. Sergeant Diaz, a man in my unit who had lost his own father to the same disease, would sometimes just come and sit with me in the hospital waiting room for hours. We didn't talk much. He was simply there, a silent presence more solid than any empty words of encouragement. Chloe's parents flew in, taking turns staying for weeks at a time. They managed the house, cooked Chloe's favorite meals, and gave me short breaks to walk and breathe. They didn't talk about being positive. They talked about reality. They shared my pain instead of asking me to hide it. The contrast between the two families was painfully clear. One, bound by nothing of blood, showed up and shouldered part of my burden. The other, who carried the Miller name, turned my tragedy into a sad story to tell their friends, a reason to sigh and say, "Poor Alex." Before getting back to their lives, they weren't thoughtless. They simply chose their own comfort over the discomfort of my pain, and that choice was colder than death itself. Time in the hospital wasn't measured in days, but in doses of medication and waves of Chloe's pain. There were good days, when she had enough strength to smile, and we'd watch an old movie on my laptop. There were bad days, when all I could do was hold her hand and wish I could absorb the pain for her. Then one afternoon, the doctor pulled me aside. "We're talking days, Captain," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "It might be time to take her home. Let her be where she's loved." Days. The word echoed in my head. No longer weeks or months. As I was packing Chloe's personal things at the hospital, preparing for that final trip home, my mother called. For the first time in weeks, she initiated the call. I felt a foolish flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, something had clicked. "I was wrong, Alex," she said, her voice cheerful. "I'm calling with good news. We've locked in the date and venue for Kevin's engagement party. A beautiful winery in Napa, the weekend after next. It's a 3-day event. All the important guests will be there." I was silent, trying to breathe. The weekend after next. Exactly within the time frame the doctor had given. "Mom," I interrupted. My voice barely recognizable. "Chloe, the doctor said she only has a few days. She doesn't have much time. I need you here. I need the family here." There was a pause on the other end. I could hear her sigh. A sigh of annoyance. "Alex, we know this is difficult," she said, her tone shifting to one of false reason. "But you're a soldier. You understand duty better than anyone. Kevin's future and the stability of this entire family depend on this weekend. His fiancée's family is flying in from New York. We can't disappoint them." She was using my own concept of duty against me. "I'm just asking you to see her one last time," I said, my voice nearly a plea. It was the last time I would ever humble myself like that. "Chloe wouldn't want you to neglect your family duty," she said, and that was her final answer. She hung up. I stood in the middle of the hospital room, the phone still pressed to my ear. Everything was decided. They had chosen a party over a goodbye. That night, on the way home, Chloe turned to me weakly. "Will you call Matt?" she whispered. "I miss him." "I called," Matt answered, the loud thud of music in the background. "Some pre-party, probably." "Alex," he yelled over the noise. "Matt, it's me. Chloe. She wants to see you." "Damn," he said, a hint of irritation in his voice. "I'm slammed, man. Best man duties. You know how at Island. We fly out next weekend. How about after the party?" "I promise. There won't be an after the party, Matt." The line went quiet. Then he said, "Sorry, I gotta go," and hung up. That was a Friday night. Their party started the following Friday. Chloe passed away on a Wednesday afternoon. In my arms, in our home. She didn't make it to the weekend. Chloe's funeral was a solemn affair. I handled everything with the quiet help of my unit. They made sure every detail was by the book, from the flag-draped casket to the steady march of the honor guard. I stood tall and received the flag from a young soldier. That image, I knew, would haunt me forever. A man in uniform, holding a flag, with nothing else left. My family, however, was a no-show. They sent a large wreath, the most expensive kind, with a ribbon that read, "With deepest sympathy." An empty gesture, a duty performed for onlookers. Throughout the service, the 3 chairs in the front row remained empty. I was used to the sight by then. I gave the eulogy myself. I didn't talk about sickness or death. I talked about Chloe, about her smile, the way she found joy in small things, her courage in facing life as a military wife. I spoke to my brothers in arms, to her parents, and to myself. I needed to remember. After the church service, we moved to Arlington. Everything was a blur until the moment the soldier handed me the flag. Its weight brought me back to reality. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in the living room staring at Chloe's flag. The silence in the house was deafening. To fill it, I did something I rarely do. I scrolled through social media, and there it was. Not a text or a missed call, but a public photo album on my mother's Facebook page, posted 2 days earlier. The title, "A Magical Weekend Celebrating Kevin and Ashley." The first picture was of my entire family, beaming in front of a Napa vineyard. My father, my mother, Kevin and his fiancée, and Matt, all dressed in fine clothes, raising champagne glasses. They looked so happy. They didn't look like a family in mourning. I scrolled through dozens of photos, candlelit dinners, wine tastings, posed smiles for the camera. Then I stopped at the comments under one picture. Kevin had written, "Thanks, Mom and Dad, for making this happen, despite everything." Their friends chimed in with congratulations. One asked, "Where's Alex?" My mother's reply was a carefully crafted masterpiece of sympathy and blame-shifting. "The poor thing is going through a difficult time. We're respecting his privacy." Respect. They called abandonment respect. I didn't feel anger. It was worse than that. It was a cold emptiness, as if a final door, one I had foolishly hoped they might still walk through, had just been slammed shut and locked from the other side. The evidence was right there, public and undeniable. They weren't just absent, they were celebrating their absence. I took screenshots. Every picture, every comment. I saved them all to a single folder on my computer. I named the folder Family Duty. They came on a Thursday afternoon, 3 days after the funeral, unannounced. I saw my father's luxury sedan pull up through the security camera. Dad, Mom, and Kevin. Matt wasn't with them. Maybe he didn't have the stomach for it. I had a few seconds to decide. Open the door, or let them stand there. Military discipline told me to face it head-on. I opened the door. "Alex," my mother began, her voice dripping with a practiced concern she'd perfected over a lifetime. "You didn't answer your phone. We were worried." I didn't respond. I just stepped aside to let them in. They walked into the living room, where Chloe's flag sat in a place of honor on the mantel. My mother glanced at it, then quickly looked away, as if it were an unpleasantry. They sat on the sofa. I remained standing. "We need to talk, Alex," my father said, placing a leather briefcase on the coffee table. He was always the one to get straight to business. "About the future, about family." "Family?" I repeated, the word tasting foreign in my mouth. "Don't be like that, Alex," my mother interjected, a note of irritation in her voice. "We know you're grieving, but life has to go on." Kevin, who had been silent until now, finally spoke. "Alex, my company is on the verge of a major breakthrough. There's a huge investment opportunity, but it requires significant capital to dominate the market." I looked at him, dead in the eye, and my father opened his briefcase and produced a file. "This is why we're here. The family trust. Your grandfather set it up for both of you boys. We need you to agree to use a portion of the trust's value as collateral for Kevin's business loan. This is for the future of all of us. They hadn't even waited for the earth to settle on Chloe's grave. I said nothing. I just walked silently to the TV, connected my phone, and opened a folder. The one named Family Duty. The first picture filled the large screen. My family, radiant in Napa. Their laughter seemed to fill the suffocating silence of the room. I slowly clicked through each photo, each smile, each champagne flute. I stopped on Kevin's comment. Despite everything, the color drained from my mother's face. My father froze. Kevin stared at the floor. "Is this the family duty you were talking about, Mom?" I asked, my voice perfectly calm. "Is this why you were respecting my privacy?" "Alex, you don't understand," my father stammered. I cut him off. Not by yelling, but with cold, precise words. "I understand perfectly. I understand that while my wife was dying, you were tasting wine. I understand that while I was burying her, you were posting celebration photos. And I understand that you are here today not to offer condolences, but to ask me to mortgage my future for your greed." I walked to the table and picked up the documents. "This trust," I said, looking each of them in the eye. "You will never touch it." Then, in front of them, I slowly tore the file in half. The sound of ripping paper was the only noise in the room. "Family are the people who show up," I said, my voice like steel. "Family are the people who sacrifice. You all made your choice in Napa. Now, I'm inviting you to leave my house." They sat motionless, stunned. "Get out," I repeated. My voice wasn't any louder, but it carried a weight they couldn't ignore. Finally, my father stood, his face a mask of angry embarrassment. My mother followed, muttering something about ingratitude. Kevin was last, never daring to meet my eyes. I closed the door behind them. The house was silent again. But this time, it wasn't the silence of emptiness. It was the silence of freedom. That freedom didn't come with immediate peace. The days after the confrontation were a strange void. No emails, no calls. It was as if my 34 years of existence in that family had been erased by the single act of tearing a document. I returned to my unit. Work was a structured release. There, everything had rules, clear objectives. I threw myself into it, working longer hours, taking on more responsibility. Some thought I was running from my grief. They were wrong. I was rebuilding my defenses. My commanding officer, Colonel Evans, called me into his office a week later. He was a seasoned veteran whose eyes saw more than people said. "Are you okay, Alex?" he asked directly. "I'm fine, sir," I replied out of habit. He shook his head. "No, you're not. But you will be. I have a job for you." He tasked me with mentoring a new young lieutenant, a kid named Peterson who was struggling to balance work and family. His wife had just had a baby, and the pressure of new fatherhood combined with the demands of the Army was overwhelming him. "You've been through a lot, Miller," Colonel Evans said. "Maybe you can teach him a few things they don't teach at West Point." It was a mission I didn't want. The irony of facing someone else's domestic happiness was not lost on me. But an order was an order. I started meeting with Peterson weekly. At first, he was reserved. So was I. We just talked about work, but slowly I started to share. Not my tragedy, but small things. About how Chloe and I had scheduled our lives to always have one date night, no matter how busy I was. About the importance of video calls just to say goodnight. By helping Peterson build the foundation for his family, I realized I was healing myself. I was turning my painful memories of Chloe into useful lessons. During this time, the family I had chosen was always there. Chloe's parents called me every Sunday, not to check up, but just to talk. We talked about Chloe, about funny memories, and sometimes just sat in comfortable silence over the phone. They became my real parents. My platoon was the same. They never let me be alone for too long. Sergeant Diaz would drag me out fishing on weekends. Others would organize a BBQ and order me to be there. They didn't treat me like a grieving man to be pitied. They treated me like a brother, and they made sure I knew I wasn't alone. Piece by piece, the bricks of a new life were being laid. The foundation wasn't blood. It was loyalty, respect, and quiet action. That foundation was stronger than I ever thought possible. 2 years didn't pass in a flash, but as a series of days, some good, some bad, most of them just normal. I was promoted to major. The house I shared with Chloe now held the sound of laughter from get-togethers with my unit. I had found a new rhythm, a peace built on a solid foundation. The past didn't disappear completely. It just became a distant echo. One afternoon, I got an email from an unfamiliar address. The subject was just one word: Alex. I was about to delete it, but something made me open it. It was from Matt. The email wasn't long. There was no hollow apology. Instead, it was a short, concise damage report. Kevin's startup had failed spectacularly after a bad investment. The engagement was called off when the money ran out. My parents had to sell their large house in Connecticut to cover their Golden Boys debts. Matt wrote that he had lost everything betting on Kevin's team and was now trying to start over in a different city. "I'm not writing this to ask for your forgiveness," he wrote at the end. "That's impossible. I just wanted to say that you were right about everything." I read the email and felt no satisfaction. I felt nothing at all, except a distant sadness for the cousin who used to be my friend. I moved the email to my archive folder and never replied. A month later, on the 2nd anniversary of Chloe's death, I went to Arlington. I no longer felt the sharp, crippling pain, just a sweet remembrance. As I was placing a bouquet of white daisies, her favorite, on her grave, my mother called. For the first time in nearly 2 years, this time I answered. I said nothing, just held the phone and listened. On the other end was the sound of sobbing. She cried, telling me how broken Kevin was, about the financial ruin, about how the family was on the verge of collapse. She accused me of being heartless, ungrateful, of turning your back on your own blood. Not a word of apology, not an ounce of remorse, just demands and blame. I listened silently until she ran out of things to say. A long silence stretched between us. "Are you finished, Mother?" I asked, my voice perfectly calm. She was taken aback. "Alex, if you're finished, then I'm hanging up. I'm busy." "Busy? What could possibly be more important than family?" she shrieked. I looked down at Chloe's grave, at the name etched in the marble. "I'm with my family." Then I hung up. That was the last time we ever spoke. I blocked her number right after. That evening, I hosted a small barbecue in my backyard. Chloe's parents were debating a marinade recipe with Sergeant Diaz. Colonel Evans was telling a joke to some of the younger soldiers. Laughter and the smell of grilled meat filled the air. I stood there, a beer in my hand, watching the people around me. They were my family, a family defined not by blood, but by choice, loyalty, and presence. I had to lose one family to realize that. But what I found was worth so much more. I looked up at the night sky, thinking of Chloe, and for the first time in a long time, I smiled, truly at peace. The war was over, and I had won.